Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 19 of our reading of Twilight Zone. We're going to go over the copyright information first, which is on your screen right now. It clearly says here, Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone is copyright 1963 by Cayuga Productions Incorporated, and Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited is copyright 1964 by Cayuga Productions Incorporated. All rights reserved. This 1983 edition is published by Bonanza Books, distributed by Outlet Book Company Incorporated, a Random House company, and gives the address there. This book was previously published as two separate works entitled Rod Serling's Twilight Zone and Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited. Printed and bound in the United States of America, and then it gives the Library of Congress number and all that. So, that is, if you're interested in that, there it is. Now, in the last part, it's been a week since I read this, but I think that we made it to the Avenging Ghost. A sheriff went to check out something weird that was going on. A dog was going crazy and going to this workbench or something. So there's something really weird going on. And we're going to find out more about it. Now, I don't remember where we left off, but okay. Okay, we're going to go back probably a page, I don't know, back a few paragraphs, because I don't remember where we left off. So, anyways. Let me see. Okay. They completed the circuit of the shed, and Hank studied the latch on the front door. He found that it joggled slightly when in place, but not enough to open of itself. Hank asked, "How did you happen to leave this loose tonight?" "I didn't," replied Janet. "Every day I check it before dark. I suppose someone could sneak up and loosen it, but it has never happened except on windy nights." "So you think the wind loosened it?" "I wouldn't know." The wind was rising again as Janet spoke, so strongly that it almost swept them from the shelter of the shed. What do you want to do?" she asked. "Stand around and watch to see what happens?" "No," Hank bawled back. "Let's go in the house." Soon they were in front of the fireplace again, where Duke nestled down, nose between paws, and quietly went to sleep, while Janet was heating up the coffee. "You see?" she queried. "Duke knows it won't happen again tonight, even though the wind is getting stronger. He only hears that odd sound at a short while after dark, and it always leads him to the shed and on into that little workshop." Hank stroked his long chin. "How often has it happened?" "3 times, I think," Janet counted back. "That's right. Tonight makes 4. The first time it had me kind of scared, for I'd have sworn there was someone prowling out there. So I took an awful long time finding out there was nobody around. Then naturally I laid it to the wind. So the second time I wasn't scared at all. I was cautious and kept hanging on to Duke. But that was chiefly because I didn't want him to go wild and run away somewhere. So I practically laughed it off, figuring it just had been the wind, even the opening latch and the suction that opened the inner door. But the third time," Janet shivered, and the coffee cup rattled as she filled it. "Well, I was just petrified. It was like seeing a movie over again, or having the same bad dream. The way the door kept opening and closing, kind of inviting me in. Made me want to run. If it hadn't been for Duke pulling me along, I would have run. That's why I sent that note to you, Hank. I just couldn't stay here alone another windy night." "So each time," mused Hank, "it was just the same as tonight?" "Almost exactly," replied Janet, "except for you being in on it and finding that tool closet." Hank finished his coffee, then remarked, "Well, since you're so sure that nothing more will happen, I'll mosey away, but I'll stop by tomorrow and have a look at that tool shed by daylight." During the night, the wind abated. Toward noon the next day, Hank Dawson drove up to the Stony Brook cottage and swung in by the rutted logging road that came around the back shed. Hank was driving a newer car than his own, and with him was a polite, gray-haired man whom he introduced to Janet Ryerly when she met them outside the cottage. "This is John Hillier," said Hank, "the claim agent for the Interstate Fire Insurance Company. He wants to make an adjustment on the farmhouse insurance. I thought he ought to see some of the furnishings here in the cottage and get an idea of what the rest was like." "Very well," agreed Janet. She turned to the claim agent. "You see, Mr. Hillier, we furnished the cottage from the farmhouse to make room for the antiques. You can look over what's in the cottage as well as the boxes in the shed, but the real value is in the antiques." "So I understand," said Hillier. "What can you tell me about the antiques?" "Very little. Most of them were still crated, just as they came in. Pete didn't want to open them until his partner Lloyd showed up so they could go over them together, but they were both away when the fire hit. Hillier decided that he would have a look in the cottage anyways. He had two other men in the car, both insurance investigators, and he told them to take pictures of the crates in the storage shed and then go up to Pleasant Farm and shoot a completely new set of photos showing the ruins as they now stood. Meanwhile, Hillier and Hank went into the cottage with Janet. While Hillier listed the furniture he saw there, Janet recalled and described similar articles that had still been in the farmhouse when it burned. Hank was helpful too, for he had visited the farmhouse in the old days and was able to attest to some of Janet's descriptions. Then they all went out to the shed and checked the boxes there, which included lamps, pictures, household appliances, winter clothes, and some sets of dishes, which Janet greatly prized. "We plan to live in the cottage," explained Janet, "and turn the farmhouse over to antiques by degrees. But there were so many rooms up there, I would think that we lost 3 times as much as what we saved by bringing it down here. Wouldn't you, Hank?" "No," admitted Hank. "I would say from 4 to 5 times as much." "We'll call it 5, declared Hillier in a satisfied tone. "I'm quite sure, Mrs. Ryerly, that we could settle your husband's claim without question so far as the value of the farmhouse and its furnishings are concerned. But he wanted double the amount because of the antiques." "And so he should," asserted Janet emphatically. "Pete often told me that he carried much more insurance than he needed, just to allow for improvements and valuables. When the antiques began coming in, he was glad he was so well insured, but he began to worry because he didn't have still more." "I understand," said Hillier sympathetically, "but we have settled claims like this before, but without an inventory, we at least need some proof. Lloyd Proctor is the man to ask for that. He's Pete's partner. I know that is all properly covered by the insurance policy, which allows for loss regardless of individual ownership. But still, the policy is in the name of Pete Ryerly. We must look for proof of loss. How he settles with Lloyd Proctor is his business, not ours." "Then what should I tell Pete when I hear from him?" "Tell him to get all the data that he can from Proctor, who most certainly should have kept some list of items that he purchased, as well as the places where he bought them. Then we can check back and make a fair settlement, perhaps even a full one." Hillier went back into the cottage to make out his report, and Janet accompanied him there, while Hank looked around the storage shed, inside and out, hoping to find some clue as to the ghostly visitant of the previous evening. Hillier had just finished his report when the honk of the horn told him that the investigators had returned from the inspection of the farmhouse ruins. So Janet saw all 4 men off in their car. In parting, Hillier said politely, "Thank you for giving us so much of your time, Mrs. Ryerly. I only hope it will prove as profitable as it should. But remember, the claim agent added this quite pointedly, we still need that proof. Janet nodded as she stood there with Duke, who had behaved quite amiably today, even welcoming the strangers in the manner of an official greeter. Hank noted the dog and chuckled as he reached down beside the wheel and passed a strong leather leash out through the car window. "Here's a present for Duke," said Hank. "It will help you to control him better at night. But if he hears noises around the shed, give him his head. Let him get there fast. He might even scare up a ghost." The weather was mild the next day, except for a touch of frost that brought the first tints of color to the northern woodlands. Each day, Janet walked down to the rural delivery box with Duke on his new leash. There wasn't even a postcard from Pete down in Florida. But one afternoon, Janet found an envelope with a postmark of a New England town named Andalusia. In it, she found a check for $100 signed by Lloyd Proctor, with a note saying, "Here's more to cover expenses on the place. Hope it will be enough until business gets better. LP." About dusk, Janet was carrying dishes from the shed into the cottage when she noted that the top branches of the yellowing trees were swaying. Off above the mountain, storm clouds threatened, but Janet decided they were moving the other way. After dusk, a few gusts brought anticipative whines from Duke, but the wind had eased when the big dog began to bristle and growl. "What is it?" asked Janet. "Hank again coming up the path?" But there was no shout from Hank, nor did Janet hear the eerie, distant cry that had perturbed Duke on past occasions. But since the big dog heard something, Janet bravely snapped on Duke's new leash and took him out. Instantly, Duke bounded for the corner of the house, then on toward the storage shed. Now he neither whined nor whimpered. He became a snarling fury. It struck Janet that this was the chance to solve the mysterious doings centered in the shed. But she did not want to blunder into trouble, nor to give Duke his head except at her own command. The new leash worked to perfection. As Janet dug both heels into the turf, Duke reared up like a reined horse. His snarling was fierce, his fangs gleaming in the cloud-filtered moonlight. As before, the shed door was swinging open, but tonight a figure was plainly crouching before it. Duke's snarl became a raucous bark. The figure darted through the doorway, grabbing the door as it went by. Janet restrained the leash. "Go!" Janet ordered. "Go, Duke, go!" The door slammed as Duke sprang. Then it bound open, and Duke shot through, with Janet close behind. The door to the little workshop also slammed shut, but Duke pawed it open instantly and went snarling through to the workshop. Janet arrived with her flashlight, heard a man's frantic shout. "Get him off me! Get him off me! Quick!" Duke's great paws were planted on a man's shoulders, bending him down on the workbench, trying to get at his throat. Janet screamed, "Down, Duke, down!" Somehow, Janet grabbed the flying leash, twisted about with a tremendous wrench, and brought Duke with her. She yanked the dog into the outer room, looped the end of the leash to a hook in the wall, and turned to the workshop. There, slumped by the bench, with his coat dangling from his shoulders, was Janet's husband, Pete Riley. His face, ordinarily handsome, had grown haggard in the weeks since Janet had last seen him. It was sallow rather than tanned by Florida sunshine. His attempted smile became a nervous grimace. "Why, Pete?" exclaimed Janet. You know Duke won't hurt you." Interrupting snarls told that Duke didn't agree. Janet ordered, "Quiet, Duke." And as the dog snarled a last protest, Pete came to his feet. Is there anyone else in the cottage, Janet? No, Hank Dawson might be coming up. Janet noted that the rising wind had died down. But it's too late for him to be coming now. I'll follow you to the cottage then, but keep the beast away from me. He got so vicious that time that only Lloyd... Oh, sorry. I'll follow you up to the cottage then, but keep that beast away from me. He got so vicious that only Lloyd Proctor could handle him. That's why Lloyd had to send him to the kennel before going down. In the cottage, Janet shut Duke in a bedroom and brought out one of Pete's own suits to replace the clothes that the dog had ripped. If you'd come in the front way, Janet told Pete, you'd have been all right. When Duke heard you out back, he probably mistook you for a prowler. You mean there have been prowlers around here? Not really, returned Janet, noting the anxiety in her husband's tone. Then, thinking that mention of ghosts might really shake him, she added, Hank thought it was just the wind banging the shed door. Anyway, it frightened Duke. Frightening that monster would be something, snapped Pete. Then, eyes worried, he queried, so you've let people go into the shed? Only the insurance men. They've been very considerate. They say they can settle the claim in full if you furnish satisfactory proof of loss. If only Lloyd would send a list of the antiques he bought, exclaimed Pete. When did you last hear from him, Janet? Why, just today. He sent a check and a nice note. Here, read it. Pete read the note, then studied the postmarked envelope. I've got it, Janet, exclaimed Pete. Tomorrow, mail Lloyd Proctor a registered letter, care of general delivery in Andalusia. Tell him to mail that list and tell him why it's needed. I can't write him because I'm supposed to be in Florida. Besides, if I mention the insurance, he will think I'm having trouble collecting it. Coming from you, it will sound like a routine matter. Pete changed to the other suit and told Janet, I'd like to stay overnight, but I can't let anyone know I'm here. The insurance people would want to talk to me, and I owe some bills around town. If you can clear up this insurance, Janet, everything will be smooth. I have my car out back, so keep Duke inside until I blow the horn, meaning I'm on my way. It was fully 10 minutes before the horn honked, and Janet wondered why he had taken so long to reach his car. But Duke was quiet when Janet released him to the excitement. So the excitement was over for tonight. The next day, Janet went to Hilldale by bus and mailed the registered letter to Lloyd Proctor in Andalusia. As she left the post office, she met Hank Dawson and his older daughter Cynthia. Half-jokingly, Hank asked, Any ghosts prowling around the mountain last night? No, just the wind, replied Janet, and it wasn't strong enough to matter. By the way, I've written Lloyd Proctor for that list. Good enough, said Hank. Let's hope you get it. Janet did get it. 5 days later, a bulk envelope arrived containing typewritten sheets and handwritten notations and the signature of Lloyd Proctor at the bottom. It described dozens of items with the dates and places of purchases as well as the prices paid. Duke began barking while Janet was still studying the list. A minute later, she recognized the rumble of Hank's old car coming in by the back road. She rushed out to meet Hank, waving the list as she shouted, Here it is, Hank, just what the insurance company ordered. Hank's long face showed a glum expression that dampened Janet's joy. I just heard from Mr. Hillier, Hank said. They've been trying to trace Lloyd Proctor through insurance agencies around the country, and now they've gotten a report on him. And a bad one. He's been gypping real estate men with a phony land scheme. Proctor gets them to put up $500 to $1,000 for a franchise to sell Florida land. Then he promises them a list of prospects to go with it, but he just goes his way and never delivers. You mean that Lloyd has been doing this with the land he wanted Pete to buy for him? That's right, but Proctor hasn't bought any land. Don't worry about Pete, though. He's in the clear. I think it would be a good idea to go down to Boston and talk with Hillier about this particularly now that you have that list. Cynthia's driving me down in her new car, so you can come along with us and stay with her." "That would be nice," said Janet. "What about Duke?" We'll be going through New Windsor, so we can leave him at the kennel and pick him up on the way back. There's something else you ought to know about Janet. It has to do with this mental message stuff." "You mean telepathy?" "That's it. Seems that Mr. Hillier got in touch with Proctor's parents outside of Boston. Mrs. Proctor, that's Lloyd's mother, has been having dreams about her son. He keeps coming back and telling her that he's drowning or something. She's got to be told the truth, that her son Lloyd is still alive. So you are one person who ought to talk to her." They drove down to Boston the next day, and Janet delivered the list to Mr. Hillier at the insurance office. The claim agent complimented Janet on having obtained the list so promptly, and he found that the signature of Lloyd Proctor tallied with samples that the office already had on file, but he made a painfully plain that a complete checkup would have to be made with all the antique dealers named at the lists. In the lists. Those recent real estate swindles in which Lloyd Proctor was involved had placed his name definitely on the blacklist. That evening they visited the Proctor home outside of Boston, where they met Lloyd's father, Hubert Proctor, a kindly gray-haired gentleman who listened attentively to all that Janet had to say about his son. Janet was glad indeed that she could tell him Lloyd had met his business obligations promptly and to the full. She emphasized that Lloyd had kept sending checks even after his partnership with Pete had resulted in failure. All that gladdened Hubert Proctor, but only briefly, for when Janet had finished, he remarked in a worried tone, "The fact remains that you have not seen my son in the past 4 months. Indeed, nobody who really knew Lloyd has seen him in all that time." That was when his mother began having these recurrent dreams in which she sees him drowning and hears him calling for help. "My wife has been resting all day, so I think that you should meet her now and hear what she has to say." Mrs. Proctor proved to be a quiet, sad-faced woman who smiled feebly when her husband told her the nice things Janet had said about Lloyd. Hank Dawson and his daughter Cynthia were also the sort who showed real sympathy, so it took very little coaxing from Mrs. Proctor to tell about her dreams. Her eyes took on a faraway glaze as she related. Then, gradually, the blackness became a rippling pool. I see Lloyd looking up from it, from the midst of those darkened waters. I hear him saying, "Mother, mother, there is water all about me." And I watch his dear face go beneath that blackness. Always for a moment his hands remain. Then they too dip beneath the surface, leaving only white ripples that die until all is black again. Mrs. Proctor's voice trailed into a drowning, gargling sound. She came bolt upright in her chair with an anguished shriek. "Lloyd, Lloyd!" Instantly Hubert Proctor was at his wife's side, calming her, saying, wake up, my darling. It's all a dream." And a moment later, Mrs. Proctor was blinking at the people whom she had just met, wondering not only who they were, but if they were actually real. "That is how it always happens," declared Mr. Proctor solemnly. "All these months my wife has been living and reliving this experience, hearing our son's voice crying not only for help, but for vengeance. For I truly believe that she can only be reflecting our son's real anguish when he met with some violent death." During the hush that followed, Janet heard her own voice asking, "Did Mrs. Proctor have such dreams before?" "I had other dreams beginning years ago," Mrs. Proctor was speaking for herself, and her eyes were dimmed with tears. Always dreams of my son Lloyd at times when he was away from home. Sometimes he was hurt, and I could hear him crying, hear his cry of pain. Other times he was happy, shouting in sheer joy, and always his voice choked. Always we heard from Lloyd soon after. But in Mr. But put in Mr. Proctor. Once he wrote that he had met with an injury. Again, that he had won a prize in college. Invariably, his mother's dream was in concert with Lloyd's actual experience. This happened so often, though, through the years, that when this dream came, we knew it was significant, and its repetition certified that fact. Now you can understand why I believe our son is dead. You say that you have heard from him, young lady. Mr. Proctor was speaking directly to Janet now. But still, you have not seen him. I wonder why he should cry for vengeance. For Lloyd's nature was never vindictive. But since these reports have come in, slurring his integrity, I believe that in death he has tried to clear his name as he would in life. We're going to have to stop this here, and we will finish and find out more about that. I think we only have a few pages left in this one. So, anyways, we have been reading from Rod Serling's Twilight Zone, 26 unforgettable explorations into the realm of the supernatural, and it is adapted by Walter B. Gibson. Now, if you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, if you want to join the Discord server, all the information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.